Good afternoon. The topic for today's class is family therapy. Specifically, we're going to discuss some concepts that pertain to family as a system, concepts that are used by social workers and counselors to properly address family issues. Also, we're going to take a look at, as you can see on the board, one of the tools that is used to describe family dynamics and portray them for the sake of the family in therapy. By looking at this, which is usually done on a piece of paper, the family members can usually see and observe the types of dynamics, problems, and events that occur. By examining this diagram, the family in therapy can clearly see the types of dynamics, significant events, relationships between the members that occur over the three generations portrayed in the diagram. Before we discuss this, though, I would like to take you through some of the basic concepts that apply to family therapy. Some key assumptions that, regardless of the school of social work, are used in approaching family therapy. First concept is one of the most important ones and describes the family as a system. The family as a system is described in order to include the dynamics of both internal and internal events and the significance of the relationships between the family members. In other words, the family is viewed as a whole, and family members are not viewed as single members that are not connected to each other. The family as a system concept implies that relationships between family members are affected by both parties, as well as the outside events. Family members' actions affect one another's in a very clear way. The family as a system implies that once something happens on one end of the system, the other end of the system is usually affected in some way. The second concept is the concept of homeostasis. Homeostasis, in translation, is a word for balance. In other words, the family as a system is viewed as a balanced system. A system that's out of balance is not stable, whereas it's important for a family, regardless of whether they're functional or dysfunctional in their daily interactions, to remain stable. Otherwise, the family falls apart. Stability within a family is not always a good thing. Counselors often see that it is because of stability and unwillingness to change and inability to change because of rigid boundaries and rigid rules within the family is not always very responsive to treatment, at least in the first phase. The actual point of treatment oftentimes becomes the disruption of this balance, disruption of homeostasis. Only by disrupting the balance of the family, the therapist may take the family members through change and eventually recreate a whole new type of a balance, which hopefully will be more functional. Speaking of balance, balance is maintained by what's called feedback loops, in this case negative feedback loops. Negative feedback loops is a term used to describe interactions between individual family members. For example, mother and father. The mother may say something to the father that the father does not like. The father responds in a specific way that's particular to his state of being, to his emotional being, and the mother naturally responds in a similar way as well. In other words, the quality of the interactions does not change often, and here we see constant fights and constant disagreements that do not lead to any functional resolutions of the problem. These constant playbacks of the same type of interactions are called negative feedback loops. The next concept is what's called the identified patient, and with it we examine the roles of other members of the family. The identified patient seems to be the most important person when it comes to engaging in therapy. The identified patient is usually the person with a problem, or the person that the family thinks or singles out to have the problem. If, for example, a father suffers from alcoholism and the family urges the father to enter treatment, may perhaps enter treatment with the father together, the father is still viewed by the family and promoted by the family as the person with the problem. The identified patient ends up being the focus of therapy, at least initially, but it is important not to give the identified patient too much value in terms of how the family views him. The family tends to place their own feelings of guilt, feelings of shame onto the identified patient, therefore escaping the fact that they have to deal with their own problems. Back to the genogram. The genogram is a tool used mostly by proponents of what's called the extended family emotional systems theory. This theory was originated by Mary Bowen, and it takes into account not only the immediate happenings within the present time in the family, but also the types of interactions and dynamics that have occurred over the last 3 generations. Let's take a look at what exactly has happened within this family over the past 3 generations. We could see, starting from the top, that from the original members of the first generation, only Julia, who is now 80 years old, is still alive. The other 3 members of the family, the grandfather and the grandmother on the left-hand side and Bill on the right-hand side, have deceased. Now, if we take a look there at Bill, we could see that Bill is portrayed to have had a mental illness of some sort. Now, these diagrams could get as specific as you would like them to be for the purposes of displaying the types of mental illness or criminal justice involvement or the types of abuse that may have taken place, for example. But for the purposes of our class, we just would like to examine the basic types of symbols that are used. Back to the diagram, Bill having had a mental illness of some sort. In his marriage to Julia, they gave birth to Peter and Lisa. Peter, who is now deceased as well. Lisa's still alive, 56-year-old, and the word church signifies some sort of significant church involvement in her life. Usually something like this, either occupation is noted or significant involvement in some organization is noted next to that person. We can see that Lisa, being drawn in thick double lines, is probably a victim of some sort, either physical or emotional abuse. And the victimization may have happened within this family here. If we take a look on the right-hand side, Victor, who is the son of Mary and Fred, is also deceased. However, Victor's marriage to Lisa, which is the second generation, has produced several children, Eric, Jim, and Dana. Eric, 23, is a carpenter, is now married to Michelle, who's 29, and we can see that Eric also suffers from a substance abuse problem. Eric and Michelle have 2 children, Edward and Beth. Beth, who is 17, is involved in the criminal justice system in some way and is also signified as having a drug problem. If we take a look on this side, Jim and June, who are divorced at this point, who were married at some time, are both portrayed as having criminal justice involvement, and Jim as well having some sort of a drug or alcohol problem. Their children, Danielle and Jennifer, being this young, are not portrayed as having any significant problems or issues at this time. Back to Dana, who also seems to have a substance abuse problem and is also a victim of some sort of abuse. What does this diagram tells us at the end? The diagram shows us, for example, that whatever the nature of the relationship between Bill and Julia was, it produced 2 children. One of them ended up being a victim of some sort of abuse. Now, the marriage of Lisa, who is the child of Julia and Bill, and Victor, who is the child of Mary and Fred, has produced 1, 2, 3 children, each one of them having some sort of a problem. What does this tell us? This tells us that perhaps Mary Bowen's view of problems, significant problems, of patterns of problems,